I do believe it's the Holy Spirit at work. Sometimes I start out thinking I'm going in a particular direction with my sermon, and then along the way, I get hijacked and it ends up going somewhere else. And that's true today. I had originally thought I would focus on the passion story that deals with Judas and Peter, and how each of them failed Jesus, but each of them responded differently to their failure. But I'm not going to focus just on the two of them, because as I read the Passion story, I realized that there are so many other characters in this story that we might identify with. If you want to hear about Judas, come to the Cumberland Presbyterian Church at noon tomorrow. I'm speaking to begin their Holy Week noonday services, and I'm going to be focusing on Judas. And to give you a little glimpse of where I'm going with what I'm saying, I'm going to plead for mercy for Judas, as we all plead for mercy for ourselves. The story begins as we began our worship service with Jesus entering Jerusalem. It's a kind of almost a satire of how royalty would enter a city. The crowds are there for the parade, for the entrance of this king that is riding a donkey. In his honor, he gets not a red carpet treatment, but he gets palm branches and coats. He comes in. It is thought that some of those same people were a part of that crowd that, after having welcomed him, shouted, "Crucify him, crucify him." Fickle people change so quickly. Jesus enters Jerusalem to celebrate the feast of the Passover with his disciples. He's eating with them. As he's eating with them, he says to them, "One of you are going to betray me." And sure enough, we know that already Judas has been conspiring with the religious authorities to help them apprehend Jesus, because they have become really antsy about Jesus' popularity, and they're afraid that the Romans that they have this sort of coexistence with, if they just behave themselves, they're afraid that Rome is going to clamp down on them if they can't contain this Jesus movement. And so Judas conspires with them. We know he conspires for 30 pieces of silver. Where we read that he's motivated by greed. There are some who wonder also if he's grown impatient with Jesus, whom he views as a political Messiah who would restore Israel to its prominence. Jesus seems to be delaying that revolution, that political revolution. And so there are those who feel like Judas wanted to force Jesus' hand, and so he conspires. John tells us that the devil enters Judas so that Judas's work is one of a kind of demonic possession. How much say does he actually have in that? And Jesus says to Judas, just go ahead and get on with it. Do what you've got to do. So was Judas merely playing his part? It was a dirty job, but someone had to do it. And Judas came up with a short straw, and so it fell to... Why did Judas do what he did? It's complicated, isn't it? Why do we do what we do? Jesus is at the table. He breaks the bread. This is my body. Gives them the cup. This is my blood of a new covenant poured out for you. Judas leaves, and then Jesus says, not only will Judas betray me, you all are going to. And you remember Peter's protest. Lord, everyone else may desert you. Count on me. I'm going to hang in there with you to the end. And Jesus says, before the rooster crows, you will have denied me 3 times. Jesus takes Peter, James, and John to the garden. And there he says to them, will you please stay awake, be on guard, protect me while I go and pray to the Father. He goes and prays, Father, if it be your will, let this cup of suffering pass from me, but not my will, but yours be done. And he goes back and he finds the disciples, his friends, sleeping, and he says, was it too much to ask that you stay awake? Judas comes with the temple police. As though he needed to, he kisses Jesus, which was the sign that Jesus was the one. They arrest him, take him first to the high priest, Caiaphas, who was among those leaders who had begun to get antsy over Jesus' popularity. They conduct a kind of kangaroo court, charge him with blasphemy, which was offensive to the religion. But they couldn't crucify Jesus or get rid of him. They had to involve the government, the political leaders. And so they take him to Pilate. There he's interrogated, not with charges that are religious, like blasphemy, but charges of treason. Are you the king of the Jews? Are you competition to Caesar? Are you a threat to the political order? Jesus simply says, you say so. And while he's being interrogated inside, Peter is being interrogated outside. You talk like the Galilean. Aren't you among his followers? You look like. I know you were with. I don't know the man. And the rooster crows. And he breaks down in tears, realizing he has failed Jesus. And when Judas sees how things are working out and what the end is going to be, Judas not only sobs, but he takes his own life. He tries to give the silver back, but they won't, the temple authorities won't take it. They tell him, you see to it yourself. And feeling that it was only him to see to it. The law said an eye for an eye, tooth for a tooth, life for a life. He bears the burden of being the one to cause Jesus' death. And so his life now must be given in exchange. That old covenant of a kind of justice without mercy, without forgiveness. Pilate, interestingly enough, not being a man of faith that we know, can at least be moved by a sense of justice and says, I don't get it. He doesn't seem to have broken any law that I can see. Pilate can see something's going on here. Jesus is being set up. It comes to his mind that during the festival, there is this custom of releasing a prisoner. And he's hoping that the people will want Jesus Christ released, because again, he can't see that he's done anything to deserve capital punishment. And so he says to the people, who do you want me to release to you? Jesus Barabbas or Jesus known as the Christ? And we know what the people say. Jesus Barabbas. Well, then what do you want me to do with Jesus the Christ? And the people yell, crucify him, crucify him. And so Pilate, who had tried to slow things down on Jesus' behalf, gives in to the people, turns him over to soldiers who take off his clothes, put on a scarlet robe, plait thorns for a crown on his head, and they carry him out toward Golgotha, the place of the skull, where apparently political crucifixions were done in order to keep order. Any who might even think of rebellion or revolution against the government could see what would happen to those persons by observing the horrible death on the cross. Jesus is mocked, he's flogged. The weight of the cross becomes so much. Simon of Cyrene is brought in, apparently totally unsuspecting, to carry the cross for Jesus because he's grown so weak he can't carry it himself. They get to Golgotha, and Jesus, his cross is placed between two criminals, bandits, we're told, who finally have someone they can judge like they've been judged. You saved others, save yourself now, and us. We know one of them says, we deserve our punishment. He doesn't. And Jesus says to him, today, you'll be with me in paradise. Jesus is on the cross. He's thirsty. He's offered sour wine, vinegar to drink. He refuses it. He prays to the Father. Father, forgive them. They don't know what they're doing. And then he breathes his last and dies. Joseph of Arimathea, we're told, was a disciple. He wasn't one of the 12, but apparently he was among the group that followed Jesus. He was a wealthy man. He had had a cave tomb carved out of stone. It had not been used. He asked for Jesus' body, and he carries the body to this new tomb and places in the door a large stone that the Romans soldiers seal, because they had heard a rumor that Jesus' followers might steal his body and claim that he had been raised from the dead. You know, we Christians are really strange people. There are Sundays in which I come across the parking lot and I ask myself, will anyone be there? Because we enter voluntarily a situation that we acknowledge will likely produce cognitive dissonance. Because we're going to have held up for us two mirrors. One is the mirror of people like us, and the other is the mirror of Jesus Christ. And when we look into both of those mirrors, we see who we are, but also who we can be. And we become aware of the gap between those two mirrors. So let's go through the story again and ask, do we see ourselves in those who were a part of this story originally? Have you ever been moved by popular opinion? Sometimes it's called mass hysteria. Have you ever been moved by, you start off in one place, convinced that you know why you're there, and before you know it, you're somewhere else, and you act on that, you live that out, and you wonder, what happened? What got into me? How did I give myself to that blowing of an evil wind? Like Judas, have you ever wondered why you do something and you wonder why you did it, and then after you did it, you feel so bad about yourself, you feel like you could just die? In fact, thoughts cross your mind, it would be easier to die than to live with what I've done. Have you ever said, like Peter, I'll never? And you did. Peter is sort of the poster child for that wisdom. Never say never. Have you ever said never and then did it? I remember growing up, all parents make mistakes. I said, I'll never do that to my kids. And then I found myself doing it to my kids, and I said, oh, golly. Ever done that? Anybody? Yeah. We look in the mirror and we see Peter and we see ourselves, Caiaphas the high priest. Let religion kill the Son of God? There are those who say it doesn't matter what you believe as long as it's sincere. Wait a minute. You can be sincerely evil. Religion can get in the way of the God of Jesus Christ. In fact, can even crucify him. Pilate, you kind of size up a situation. You see what's going on, and you see what's right, what's wrong. You see the injustice, and you want to stop. You want to stop the ball that's rolling, and yet in the end, you know that if you do, it's going to roll over you because of the popular opinion, and so you just throw your hands up and say, whatever you all want, do. Ever found yourself like the soldiers mocking, taking delight in another's suffering? Have you ever felt finally there was someone beneath you? You felt so low, suffer from such low self-esteem that finally there's someone who looks to you like they're in a worse place than you are, and so you can judge like the criminals on each side of Jesus. Joseph of Arimathea used his wealth for good. Are we using our wealth for good? Well, there are a lot of mirrors in this story for us to look into to see ourselves, and then the mirror of Jesus, in whose light we see ourselves as we really are. But the good news that if Judas had just waited long enough, he could have heard it. The good news: God accepts us as we are, but loves us too much to leave us the way he finds us. Amen.